Welcome, everyone, to our webinar on new therapies in sarcoidosis, helping the FDA understand the needs of those living with sarcoidosis. I'm Tricia Shivas, Chief of Staff and Strategy here at the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. Before we get started, a bit of housekeeping. Tonight's session will be in the webinar format, which means that your cameras will remain off and you will remain muted throughout the session. If you have any questions, please type any of your questions into the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to respond during the Q&A session at the end. I would like to take a minute to thank our sponsors for the upcoming externally led patient-focused drug development meeting with the FDA. Boehringer Ingelheim, Mallinckrodt Pharmaceuticals, aTyr Pharma, Kinevant Biosciences, and Zentria. We would like to acknowledge our partner organizations, the American Lung Association, the Bernie Mac Foundation, and the Foundation for Organ Donation and Sarcoidosis Awareness. It is now my pleasure to introduce FSR's CEO, Mary McGowan.
Thank you, Tricia. And welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. We've gathered here today to discuss how you can make sure your voice is heard, your experiences acknowledged, and your desires for new and better therapies are prioritized in clinical trials and drug development. Now is the time for sarcoidosis. Now more than any other time before, sarcoidosis is being prioritized in research. In fact, we were recently at a large international medical conference where sarcoidosis research sessions were standing room only, with over 450 clinicians and scientists clamoring to learn more. This, when only just a few short years ago, we were at the same conference when most chairs were empty and a room could not be filled with interested researchers. Continuing to beat the drum is and will continue to make sarcoidosis a priority. With the formation of the FSR Global Sarcoidosis Clinic Alliance, which brings together over 40 clinics and institutions from around the United States committed to finding a cure and offering evidence-based patient-centric care for those living with sarcoidosis, now is the time for sarcoidosis because we have the power of significant collaboration to improve outcomes and accelerate research. Now is the time for sarcoidosis because just this year, with the help of this incredible community, there have been 4 clinical trials focused on sarcoidosis and sarcoidosis-related interstitial lung disease that have completed enrollment. And now is the time for sarcoidosis because we can't afford to wait any longer. Sarcoidosis was first discovered over 150 years ago, and in the time since its discovery, there have only been 3 drugs approved by the FDA to treat sarcoidosis and its symptoms. This must change, and it must change now. One of those approved drugs, corticosteroids, or steroids for short, remains the most commonly prescribed therapy to treat sarcoidosis. As FSR board member and sarcoidosis patient Heidi Junk has said, the prednisone Band-Aid has gotten larger and larger over the years, despite the fact that the majority of our community has expressed concerns with steroid treatments due to its side effects, like weight gain, mood changes, insomnia, and even development of comorbidities like diabetes, heart disease, and osteoporosis. Steroids remain a necessary tool for controlling sarcoidosis symptoms and reducing sarcoidosis inflammation in the body. We know that steroids are not the answer. Research has demonstrated that even a year of steroids can lead to heart disease, lower patients' quality of life, and have a lasting negative impact on quality of life. We need more and better treatment options, and we need them now. This is what tonight's conversation is all about, how you can help FSR help the FDA understand the urgency and importance of supporting the development of better therapies in sarcoidosis that address the symptoms most important to you. For those of you who are new to sarcoidosis or to FSR, let me pause just to give you a little bit of background. FSR was founded by a patient and her husband over 25 years ago with the goal of finding better treatments and a possible cure while supporting those impacted by this challenging disease. We are driven by a collaborative spirit because we know that the only path forward is to learn from one another as we build towards a better tomorrow. There are 5 pillars to our approach. We help fund and support research through a number of grants that support early and mid-career professionals as they work to improve the care of sarcoidosis research. We provide a space for clinicians to learn from one another and discuss best practices, the goal of improving patient care and outcomes. We provide patient support through programs like our one-to-one support program called the Patient Navigators and our live and virtual support groups. We provide educational webinars, create educational infographics, and provide helpful information through the FSR Sarc Fighter podcast with John Carlin and our website and social media channels. And finally, we advocate on Capitol Hill with the National Institutes of Health. And today, we will discuss the way that you can join us in raising awareness with the FDA. In all the things we do, we are guided by the FSR Governing Board of Directors. And our esteemed scientific advisory board, made up of world-renowned experts in pulmonary, cardiac, and neurosarcoidosis, along with rheumatologists, geneticists, and immunologists. In April of 2022, the FSR conducted a patient listening session with the FDA to initiate our conversations with them. This was a closed-door session and chance for a handful of patients to share their stories to help the FDA better understand challenges with diagnostic tools, the urgency for more therapies, and the need for drug development that is more responsive to patients. This patient listening session was well attended by the FDA, with over 50 FDA representatives, 16 offices, and 5 divisions in attendance. The FDA patient listening session laid the groundwork for the more robust conversation with the FDA that we are now planning, the externally led patient-focused drug development meeting, or EL-PFDD, scheduled for October 28th this year. So what is exactly a PFDD? Well, it's a public meeting with the FDA led by an outside organization, in this case, FSR, with the goal of informing the FDA of what it is like to live with sarcoidosis, the challenges with current therapies, and the patient needs and desires when it comes to the development of future therapies. The goal of the PFDD is to hear directly from patients and caregivers to ensure that future drug development and approvals keep the needs of the patient at the center. So how does the PFDD differ from the patient listening session we held 2 years ago? Well, the PFDD is a public meeting, and unlike the patient listening session, during the PFDD, we want to be able to capture as many voices and experiences of those impacted by sarcoidosis as possible to help the FDA get a true understanding of not only how the disease impacts you on a day-to-day basis, but also what side effects or symptoms of your disease do you most want addressed. The learnings from the PFDD will culminate in the voices of the patient report. The FDA uses this report in ensuring that patients' needs and desires stay at the center of all future clinical trials. Some of you may be asking, why are we having this meeting with the FDA now? Well, most importantly, sarcoidosis patients have been waiting too long for better therapies, and now is the time for that to change. Over the last few years, there has been increasing interest from pharmaceutical companies and biotechs in bringing new therapies to the sarcoidosis community. In order to build upon this momentum, It is important for us as a community to share why new treatments are needed. Finally, in the last few years, the FDA has been putting an increased emphasis on patient-desired outcomes and ensuring that clinical trials reflect the needs of the community. This meeting is the opportunity for us to share and gather those insights in a formal way with the FDA. I will now pass it back to Tricia Shivas, FSR's Chief of Strategy and SAF, to provide you with a little bit more insights about the FDA, how it works, and what type of information they want to know. Tricia?
Thanks so much, Mary. Appreciate it. So let's start by talking a little bit about research and clinical trials. There are essentially 5 phases in the clinical trial process. The first phase is the preclinical trial phase, where researchers seek to identify and test in simulated environments or animal models the impact of potential molecules or chemical compounds on the presumed mechanism of the disease progression, or the symptom manifestation. This phase is often done in a lab, and what they are looking for the most is that it is possible to introduce a new chemical compound that will have a positive impact on the individual, their disease, or their symptoms. This phase can last a long time, as long as 10 years, and is always a first step in understanding this process. This is then followed by phase 1 clinical trial. Phase 1 includes healthy volunteers and consists of between 20 to 100 participants. This phase can take several months to a year and is focused on figuring out the safety and dosage for the therapy that they want to introduce. Phase 2 is with sarcoidosis volunteers and includes about 100 patients. This can take up to 2 years to complete and is focused on testing the effectiveness of that new therapy and to see what types of side effects people might experience so they can determine if that is acceptable. Phase 3 includes patient volunteers and includes about close to 300 to even as much as a few thousand participants. The phase tests for effectiveness and improving symptoms or stopping the progress of the disease, and is also looking at different dosage levels in order to also identify potential side effects. And the final phase is the phase 4. So the FDA is not done looking at and making sure drugs are safe after phase 3 and after they've approved a drug. Just because a drug is approved doesn't mean it is not monitored. The monitoring is the phase when it is out of a controlled environment of the clinical trial. And this is real world evidence, so how your doctors are actually prescribing this medicine. In sarcoidosis, we currently have ongoing trials in the first 4 phases that I identified here, which means new therapies may be just beyond the horizon. So what is the role of the FDA in this drug development process? The mission of the FDA is to promote public health and to regulate drug development. As industry and academia work through the trial process, the FDA provides technical assistance and guidance to drug developers. They also work with drug developers to ensure that their drugs are adequately tested and safe for the community. Though the FDA supports drug development, they themselves do not develop drugs, nor do they run clinical trials. Once a medication is approved, they also do not control the prescribing practices. Many of the drugs that are used in sarcoidosis are not FDA approved for sarcoidosis specifically. However, clinicians use their best clinical judgment and understanding of the mechanism of the disease and the mechanism of the therapy, and will use those therapies in hope that they can alleviate the patient's symptoms. Although the clinicians do not know for sure, without FDA level scientific data, if many of these drugs will work for everyone in the population, they rely on experience and small studies to drive the management of their patients' symptoms and their care needs. The FDA does not interfere with this practice or control whether insurance companies provide patients access to medication or even how expensive a drug is once it's on the market. The FDA is, however, concerned with the patient remaining at the center of all treatment strategies, and this is why the EL-PFDD is so important. It provides the opportunity for the FDA to learn what matters most to you, to your loved ones, and for new therapies that are developed in this space. The FDA uses this as a guide for drug developers. Here are a few questions that the FDA is interested in when considering trials. Is the trial representative of the community, race, gender, the complexity of the disease? I saw a few people talking in the chat about having multiple organs involved in their disease, for example. What symptoms matter the most to patients? What endpoints or what outcomes from therapy mean the most to patients? Is the informed consent that is being provided for clinical trials clear on the risks and benefits of participating in that trial? And are the patient's preferences considered in the trial design? How can medication instructions help inform patients and clinicians when they are making a decision about what therapy will be best for them? As you prepare to participate in the upcoming EL-PFDD, keep in mind the types of information the FDA hopes to learn from you. What is it like to live with sarcoidosis? What symptoms are most challenging for you? What do you like and not like about current therapies that you are using? What risks are you willing to take on to have new therapies to address your most needed symptoms? It is now my pleasure to introduce Elise Hoover, FSR's Vice President of Research, to discuss in more detail how you can get your voice heard as part of FSR's PFDD. Elise.
Thanks, Trisha. Hi, everyone. So great to be here with you today. I'm really excited to do this meeting with the sarcoidosis community because I did one of these last year in autosomal recessive polycystic kidney disease, and it was just so impactful. So let's start with why you should participate. Your sarcoidosis experience is unique. This is a rare opportunity to share your perspective with the FDA and also with the companies who are working to develop treatments. The FDA, of course, wants to hear from you. That's why they're working with us to plan this meeting and while they'll be sending many representatives to attend. We're hoping to impact two things: better treatments that target aspects important to you and quicker approvals of those treatments by the FDA. And your voice will help us do that. Here's what our agenda looks like on October 28th. So we'll have a welcome and introductory comments from the FDA and also FSR. And then the rest of the day is broken up into two parts. Part one will focus on the experience of patients with sarcoidosis. Those are symptoms, burdens, impacts on your daily life. We want to know how it impacts your relationships, your finances, and your ability to engage with your community. And then part two will focus on current treatments, limitations of those treatments, on your symptoms, on the management of your disease, and also considerations for clinical trials. And both sections will begin with an overview by Dr. Lisa Meyer, who treats individuals with sarcoidosis at her clinic at National Jewish in Denver and also conducts valuable research. So first, a thank you to those who have already helped to shape this agenda. Many of you submitted your stories on the registration form or you completed our recent survey. And those insights have helped to shape the topics we'll discuss and help make sure the priorities for the day align with your goals and your experiences. If you haven't yet participated, though, don't worry. There are still many more ways for you to get involved. During the meeting itself, which is virtual, we will have live polls. This will be a chance for you to provide your insights and also see if your experiences line up with those of the other sarcoidosis patients on the line and care partners. At certain points, we'll also ask you to call in and share parts of your story relevant to the current discussion topic. And then also, of course, if you need some time to reflect and think about how you'd like to contribute, we'll have a form where you can submit your comments on our webpage. It'll be available soon, And it's a really great way for you to make sure that your experiences become a part of the final report, which is called A Voice of the Patient. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So when preparing your comments, we have a few tips for you to consider. One is to review again what the FDA does and does not focus on from Trisha's presentation. Although they may be sympathetic to challenges, including affording medications, that's not something that they can affect or change. So we recommend that you focus your comments on the burden of the disease in your life and what you'd like to see in current and future therapies. Please don't be afraid to call in, and don't be afraid to repeat something someone else said. This will help us reinforce some of those aspects and the importance to our community. We recommend that you write some notes to keep your comments clear and focused. And if you don't get the opportunity or choose not to share your comments live, of course, please submit them on our form on our website so we can include them in that report. And so here's how we plan to capture the perspectives that come out of this meeting. This is called the Voice of the Patient report. It is a written summary that captures all aspects of this meeting. So that's the patient testimonials we hear live. It is the polling feedback, the survey results, submitted comments. We want to be really comprehensive and capture all of those voices. And this report becomes an invaluable tool to the FDA as they look to ensure future clinical trials reflect the needs and desires of the sarcoidosis community. So mark your calendars, October 28th, 2024, this year, from 10 to 3 Eastern Time. Please invite your family, other individuals impacted by sarcoidosis, your doctors, your friends. All are welcome, and we also hope to show the FDA that new and better therapies are important to this community. We also, of course, expect to see care partners, doctors, researchers, pharmaceutical companies, and of course, FDA staff. This is virtual, so you can join from anywhere. And we'll drop the registration link in the chat shortly. One note is that when you join the day of the event, we will have another quick registration form for you to fill out, just your name and email for security purposes. But by registering now, you'll make sure you get important reminders leading up to the day. There is no Zoom or other traditional webinar link to follow. The live video will be featured on the same webpage as where you register, stopsarcoidosis.org/PFDD. So in conclusion, your voice matters. Please join us on October 28th and be a part of the drug development process with us. Our goal is to impact the design of clinical trials and the kinds of therapies developed for sarcoidosis, and we need you in order to do that. Only together can we stop sarcoidosis. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you at the live meeting. And we will now take questions from the audience. Please type any questions you have into the chat box at the bottom of your screen.
And I'll invite Mary to join us back on the screen. And so we did get a couple of questions that we can start to field here. Elise, maybe you can answer this. One of the questions was, why are the trials all focusing on lungs, and is the EL-PFDD only interested in pulmonary sarcoidosis?
Yeah, a great question. We are interested in all kinds of sarcoidosis. I think that's some of the challenges that we're hearing from our patient community, from our researchers, that we really want to see research that looks at all aspects of the disease, all the different experiences that patients are having with sarcoidosis. And it's one of the challenges we want the FDA to hear when they think about designing, seeing new clinical trials in this space. We want to find therapies that target all of these different manifestations. So please, if you have sarcoidosis in the lung, in the skin, in your heart, please join us. We really want to hear your experience.
And so Mary, we had a question around whether international folks can also weigh in. And I know we're excited to have all participants. We want to say a little bit more about that.
Yes, absolutely, international folks. We look forward to having you weigh in and share your experience and share your challenges as well as patients of sarcoidosis. So thank you for that question, and we look forward to many international patients and caregivers joining on October 28th.
And I saw a question around when was the most recent drug approved in our space. And so one of the things to know about the therapies that are in the space that have been approved so far is they are sometimes limited to certain specific areas. And so we did have a drug that was approved for people who have advanced lung disease. It's an antifibrotic that's specifically focused for interstitial lung disease. And that was very recent. I think 2022, maybe 2021. I'm off the top of my head, I don't remember the exact date, but fairly recently when that was approved. Before that, there was another therapy that was approved, a corticotrophin drug in the 1950s, which continues to be something that helps a lot of people as they are also considering. Many of the other therapies that are being utilized in the space have gone through FDA approval. So I want to make sure that people understand, but not in sarcoidosis. So they are approved in other areas. And so we don't have the data to demonstrate per se that it works for sarcoidosis. There are a number of small studies that are being done by sarcoidosis researchers to look at this, but no large clinical trials that have been done in sarcoidosis, with the exception of the newer trials that are underway. And Elise, maybe if you want to say a little bit about how exciting it is to see these newer trials underway in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. We have some really fantastic therapies in the clinical trial pipeline. We've seen a number of studies, as was mentioned by Mary, who've completed enrollment in the past year or two. So it's really fantastic to see these new partners. These are scientists and researchers interested in finding compounds that can better treat sarcoidosis. So we're seeing that grow, the number of partners grow, and many of those partners are joining us and supporting this meeting on the 28th as well.
And I see a few questions in here around steroids and how that has been impacting individuals and understanding other therapies that may be helpful for steroids. This is an example of something that you want to share. Mary, do you want to say a little bit more about how people can share their experience with steroids, one of the most commonly used drugs, and get the FDA to understand that a little bit more?
Great, thank you. Yes, we are most interested in hearing your experience, if you are on steroids and how long you might have been on steroids and the impact that that has provided to you, any side effects. We see fatigue a lot mentioned by patients. We see side effects, including weight gain, including a moon face. All of these things are critically important for you all to share with us that day so that FDA can have an understanding of what the challenges are with steroids in terms of treatment for sarcoidosis. So it's critically important. There's also comorbidities that also should be shared that we hear about from sarcoidosis patients. Diabetes, heart disease, osteoporosis is a big one. These are critically important to bring to the forefront as we are discussing steroids as treatment for sarcoidosis patients.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And I see a couple of people that are asking some questions around, I'm trying to get through all the different questions, so hang tight with me. Who can we invite to this event? And Mary, you want to take that one too? Who's welcome to share their voice here? Besides just the patients, who else do we want to be able to hear from? Who else should attend?
Well, we definitely want caregivers to attend and speak up and share experience as well. Things that they may notice as caretakers and things that should be to the forefront for the FDA. So we definitely encourage caregivers. We also encourage clinicians to attend the event. We're hoping many of our Global Sarcoidosis Clinic Alliance members participate, and they have a number of different, obviously, staff on board, everyone from those who are enrolling clinical trials, helping patients enroll, to cardiologists, to neurologists, rheumatologists, and so forth. So we want the whole community community to really be represented on the 28th. It is virtual, so it offers the opportunity for anybody who registers to be a part of this community and this really milestone event for sarcoidosis with the FDA. Thank you.
And so there's a lot of folks that are listing off like different therapies that they've tried and they have failed or haven't been successful for them. Elise, could you say a little bit about why this is important information for the FDA to have and understand a little bit more?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and thank you for sharing that. And please bring those with you to our meeting on October 28th. The few of the things we really want to highlight on that meeting are the symptoms that are most impactful and how the medications you're taking are affecting those symptoms or affecting your disease, any side effects, anything that really works or doesn't work, and what it is that you would like to see in a therapy, the kind of impacts that you want to see. And so whether the current medications you're taking are meeting those expectations or not, that's very important for the FDA to understand. This will also help us when we are thinking about designing new clinical trials so that those symptoms and those impacts that are most important to you are the outcomes that we're looking at in those trials and that we're testing these new therapies in. So that's all very important and relevant information, and please don't lose it, write it down.
And Elise, there were some questions around whether the FDA cares about non-traditional therapies in this space. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I would love your thoughts on this too, Trisha. I think, anything that impacts your experience and your disease, whether positively or negatively, is going to be important for the FDA to hear. Trisha, do you have anything specific you'd like to highlight?
So the FDA does have a division that focuses on things like vitamins and other types of medications that people might use in a more naturopathic way, that they would definitely be interested to see if you are having something that's related to that. So that is part of one of their divisions, is regulating those pieces. So for sure, sharing those information. Non-traditional therapies such as meditation or other things like that they would be very interested in how it's impacting your daily life. But with regard to drug development itself, it's not necessarily a part of their overarching mission to understand all of those details. That doesn't mean we don't care. We want to hear how all these things are helping you. But with regard to getting that information to the FDA, they're most interested, as it is their mission, to really focus on different therapies that are impacting or being used to intervene when people are having those different therapies. I'm also seeing some questions around the process for getting approval to use treatments and what off-label means. Elise, can you give a little bit more of a description of what off-label means so people can understand that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Off-label often refers to the use of medications that are not approved for that given disease, but that clinicians believe will have an impact. So many of the medications that we saw listed in our planning survey and in some of the comments we received are off-label. They are not approved by the FDA for sarcoidosis, but our clinicians and of course you have seen some positive impacts from utilizing those. So we do not consider those currently approved therapies, but they are definitely an important part of your medication history and what works for you.
There's questions around how off-label treatments get technically FDA approved, and how this would be relevant to the PFDD, as far as if there were therapies that people wanted to, how can they express that to the FDA? And Elise, you want to jump in on that too?
That's a great question. I think it really comes down to understanding, getting real world data that Trisha talked about from our community. So there are many resources in the medical community that help us collect data like that, the kinds of patients that are taking these medications, what their disease state is, how it's affecting their symptoms. We'll put a little plug in for a real data resource, which is FSR's patient registry. Please, consider signing up for that if you are impacted by sarcoidosis. We collect information like which organ is impacted by sarcoidosis, the medications you're taking, the symptoms that you're experiencing, to really help collect that real world evidence and data so that researchers can start drawing conclusions between some of these off-label uses of medications and how they might be impacting the patient community. So please look for opportunities like that to participate in research and help us collect that data.
And
Trisha,
Mary,
anything
how
else
do
to add there?
we, that was perfect. Yeah. And Mary, how do we ensure that everyone's voice is included in this? And what are we doing to make sure that the data and the FDA understand that there are many different types of sarcoidosis and different communities that are impacted by sarcoidosis?
Yeah, so great question. So first of all, again, the survey, thank you to everybody who participated in that. We gleaned a lot of information, and the whole purpose of that was to get everybody's voice involved through the questions that were answered on that and summarized and will be shared with the FDA. I think, as also was previously mentioned, we will be doing polls throughout the session on the 28th. And again, you know, when you're there attending, you do have a voice there with the polls. So we're doing those polls specifically to bring in the patient voice. We think that's much more impactful than us just saying patients say. This way they know patients are and care partners are part of the event itself, and they can see directly and hear directly from you. The report that we're going to be developing as a result of this PFDD is so critically important. This is really going to be the key and the outcome for the PFDD. And again, your voice, your reflections will be shared in that report that will also be posted, I believe, on the FDA website, and that we will be sharing with industry partners and other researchers throughout our continued work for better drug therapies. So again, we encourage everybody to attend and get your doctor to attend too. It's an opportunity to let your doctor know that this PFDD is taking place, and we look forward to hearing from clinicians as well, and some of the polling and the work that we're doing there.
And I see a lot of folks that are talking about either having positive or negative experiences with the therapies that they're currently on. This is the kind of thing that the FDA is trying to understand. They're trying to understand what is currently being treated, what is not currently being treated, where are there gaps that do need additional therapies. As we were talking about the off-label use of the drug, as Elise mentioned, right, there are opportunities for drug developers to hear this and hear that there is positive effects for individuals that they're experiencing, and begin to explore ways that we could get better therapies for those living with sarcoidosis. In addition, those that are already FDA approved have gone through those early phases that we talked about in here. And there's an opportunity for them to, some of those drug companies, if they're interested, to look for what's called another indication. So if it's, for example, a rheumatoid arthritis drug, they may want to make sarcoidosis another indication. So there are lots of opportunities for this information that you're sharing to become powerful, not only for the FDA, but for drug developers that are listening, that are interested in thinking about how they might be able to, in the future, support this community. So wanted to share that as well. I'm skipping through a couple of questions here, just to see if I'm not missing anything. If there are other questions, please do put them in the chat. I did hear a question with regard to whether this will be available, this particular session that we're doing tonight will be available, and how people can make sure that they sign up. So Elise, do you want to jump in on if they can sign up on this, how they can sign up for the upcoming event?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll put this in the chat. This is our webpage with all the information about this meeting. So that is stopsarcoidosis.org/PFDD. And so that has information about the agenda, what we hope to accomplish, and also there is a link to register. In the registration, there'll be some questions about your disease experience, any particular comments that you would like to submit. And then we will be contacting you with more information about how to join day of.
And I see just another question that did come in here with regard to whether the FDA is focused on learning about environmental impacts of the disease. So the FDA, again, is focused on drug development and focused on also another arm of what they do is medical devices. That is not something that is necessarily their focus, but it is something that FSR is continuing to learn about and to advocate for. Mary, did you want to say a little bit about how we are doing that advocacy in other work that we're doing here at FSR?
So environmental topics are really important to us. We see obviously some triggers for sarcoidosis. 9/11 is a great example of that. We see very high numbers, roughly 27,000. It's reported in the veteran community. So it's really important that we do pay attention to environmental issues and get a better understanding of that. So again, I think there's opportunities for that. Lise was talking earlier about our registry. We've been doing some education on environmental factors and are looking forward to doing more of that. And the other thing that's interesting that I did want to mention, somewhat related to this, is I mentioned in my opening that we had roughly 50 FDA representatives at the patient listening session, which is remarkable, by the way. Tricia, myself, Elise have all done patient listening sessions before and have not seen that kind of attendance. So that was really, really thrilling to see so much engagement. And what's even more thrilling is since that, in our educational sessions that we've been doing, particularly at the clinician level, we do see many FDA representatives register for our educational programmatic activities. So we do know that there's a closer look at sarcoidosis. There's a closer look at some of the things that may be triggering the disease and just in general learnings about sarcoidosis from the clinicians as well as the patient lived experience. So thank you for that great question.
And Elise, can you explain the difference, what FDA's role is again versus like a drug developer's role? Because some people are asking questions around whether the FDA is looking into certain alternative therapies or they're exploring certain drugs and therapies. And can you explain where the drug developers come in and where the FDA comes into this so people understand how to elevate that voice?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we often see drug developers. So that could be researchers, pharmaceutical companies. They are the ones who are bringing those compounds forward and studying those in the studies that Tricia mentioned, phase 1 through 3 clinical trials. The FDA is a regulatory body that ultimately approves the therapy. So they have a role in looking at the design of the clinical trial and the evidence and that leads to this compound being moved forward into the clinical trial space and the safety of patients. They are approving those as they come before them. They are not doing their own research. So that's the pharma companies and the researchers who are also going to be joining us day of. And why we think it's important for both the FDA and those companies to hear you is because we want to make sure that they're focusing on those outcomes that mean the most to patients, that they're finding therapies that target the things most important to you. And because both the pharma companies and the FDA are looking at those outcomes, and especially when they're considering approving a drug for the market, we want them to keep that in mind.
And I saw a few people putting in here a lot of frustration with the fact that sarcoidosis has been known about for over 150 years, and we still don't have great therapies that are treating all of the different symptoms in order to support patients. Mary, why do you think that that's such an important part for people to raise their voice and say to the FDA at this stage?
I think it's important for us to highlight that, and we plan to highlight that in the opening statement at this patient-focused drug development session. Sarcoidosis has been around for 100 to 150 years. We don't have, as we've been talking about, we don't have the good number of therapies and therapies that could and should be doing a much better job of treating all types of sarcoidosis. So again, the FDA needs to hear this, and it really need to hear the urgency about this. It's something that we push. There are well, we know it's reported approximately 200,000 people living with sarcoidosis. We actually think it's more than that. Everywhere we go, we talk about sarcoidosis. We present on sarcoidosis at medical conferences or patient conferences. Everyone comes up to our exhibit booth and they say, oh, I have a friend, or I have a family member, or I have someone. It just seems like it's getting much more attention, and it's getting probably earlier diagnoses now because of the strides that we have made in sarcoidosis. But again, for something that's been around for over 100 years, our real goal at FSR right now, as we keep saying, is to make sarcoidosis now the time for sarcoidosis. We see this happening with other diseases that get a lot of attention, right, as things move forward. And we believe, and we are living it actually, that now is the time for sarcoidosis, so that we're not waiting another 100 years. We're taking a couple of different approaches to our work to ensure that we are doing different things, and we are elevating research, and we are elevating conversations with pharmaceutical companies, not just to wait for them to come to us, but to initiate conversations. There was discussion earlier about some drugs, off-label drugs, that are being used that are helping sarcoidosis patients, but there's not something that is in their wheelhouse that is FDA approved. Well, conversations with that industry partner about perhaps taking a look at repurposing a drug are really important. And that's where we spend much of our time to ensure that we are doing everything that we can do to push therapies to the forefront, to push research for those therapies to the forefront, and to really make a difference now for all of our patients who are out there living with sarcoidosis, who deserve better treatments, who deserve not to have to put up with such can be challenging comorbidities and side effects from steroids, and really make sure that we are doing everything that we can to ensure that we are developing better therapies. So thank you for that great question.
And Elise, there's a lot of questions around understanding sarcoidosis as a rare disease, and how the FDA considers sarcoidosis as a rare disease, perhaps differently than it considers other diseases that are larger when thinking about clinical trials. Could you just say a little bit about that for folks?
Yeah, absolutely. So one benefit that comes with being a rare disease is that often the FDA will consider applications to study a therapy in that disease to have what's called an orphan drug status. That means that sometimes in the right settings, you can get accelerated approvals, maybe a little more urgency added to review of those applications. And of course, meetings like this, like a PFDD, add more urgency on top of that. So and I will also say that PFDD meetings that feature rare disease are often quite impactful. And so it's a really great combination.
Thank you. So it looks like we, whoops, I'm getting just a few more here. Okay, so it looks like we're getting really fantastic comments and questions from all the different people attending today. We encourage you to join us for sure on October 28th, and also submit your thoughts and comments as we continue to prepare. Mary, can you say a little bit about how we have been using the comments that people have already been submitting through their registration and as we're shaping the agenda for this event?
Absolutely. Your comments, your contributions, the information that you all are sharing, in fact, is shaping the agenda that we're continuing to tweak, the comments that we are developing to make statements at the event itself, to develop poll questions. Critically important to have your input. We're looking for trends and themes that are critically important at the forefront for all patients and care partners. So the more you share, the better job that we can do to represent the agenda and represent all of your voices that day on October 28th. So please continue to share with us your thoughts, your comments, things that you think are critically important. We do want to hear from you on an ongoing basis. You can email any of us with that information. Continue to, if you haven't registered, there's an opportunity there. So we want to hear your voice and continue to hear from you, even if you've shared some things and you continue to think about things and come up with some great ideas. Please share those with us.
And so, Elise, we've gotten lots of excitement and lots of engagement in the chat. Can you remind people of all the different ways that they can make sure to lend their voice, both on the day of, after the event, and before the event?
Absolutely, yes. So before the event, as I mentioned, that registration form has some great areas to put some additional comments, thoughts you'd like us to bring to the meeting. And that will help us in planning the agenda. And as Mary mentioned, the poll questions and the discussion questions. Day of the meeting, again, it is a live virtual meeting, and there will be opportunities in the browser you're watching the meeting to answer those poll questions, to submit comments. There'll also be opportunities to call in and share your story, provide, and then of course, more opportunities to provide comments after the meeting on that same webpage. And all of that will be collected and included in our Voice of the Patient report.
Wonderful. So as we start to wrap up here, I'm going to turn to each of you, and I'll also chime in myself. I'll kick us off with what is it that we hope everyone takes away from today's meeting. So most importantly, we hope that you take away that your voice matters. That is critically important for you to share your story in moving different pieces forward for us, and making sure that people understand that the FDA and our drug developers and other partners understand what is happening for you. What is your personal experience with the disease? How have therapies worked for you? Is it addressing your symptoms? Elise, what would you like for people to take away from this?
Yeah, I'd love to bounce off that and say that FSR is hoping to use this opportunity to amplify your voice. And we can't amplify this message at all without you. So we really hope that you'll join us day of and participate however you feel most comfortable or feel most compelled or engaged to participate. We need you, and we thank you so much in advance for joining us. Mary?
And Mary.
Well, I'm going to reiterate the theme of now is the time for sarcoidosis. This is it. We've got an appointment with FDA. A lot of work has gone into getting this appointment. A lot of work has gone into the patient-focused drug development session, the patient listening session. We've got FDA's attention. As I mentioned, they're listening to us. They're participating with us. Now is the time for sarcoidosis. So if you're going to do anything this year, this is it. This is what we really are asking you to come to the event, to share your voice, your important voice, to make FDA really hear what is most important to you as someone living with sarcoidosis, right? Patients are the CEOs of their disease. Absolutely 100%. We need all the CEOs there to represent themselves and to represent the others in the community. And this is a great opportunity to do it. So please join us. Mark your calendars now so you don't forget. October 28th. It is virtual, so it's an easy thing to join us. And thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you on October 28th. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.